All right, welcome into Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football. Andrew Miller here on a Monday evening. And just a heads up, right off the jump, my computer is acting slow. My computer is also making noises. So we'll see if we have any issues during this stream. Hopefully not. Hopefully things go smoothly. But if something happens and I have to cut the stream short, that's why. Because, the laptop seems to be acting up. This is an old laptop. It's probably on its last legs. I hope I don't have to replace it soon, but feels like that's probably getting closer and closer to being the case. But we'll see. And hopefully we can get through this stream, get through this episode with everything going smoothly. But yeah, it's Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football, a program that you can catch here at this channel on Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central Time, Thursdays when we do our call-in show. And Monday 6 is generally the just newsy stuff, getting into whatever we have to talk about for Mississippi State, which is going to be what we do on tonight's pod. Got a lot of fun stuff to talk about tonight. We'll talk a little bit about baseball, getting a sweep up in Oxford. Great for them to continue the domination of Ole Miss and to get a series sweep, to continue a great start to SEC play. Talk about the Bulldog linebacker room as we continue to preview MSU football position groups throughout the spring. And then SP Plus, we have the initial ratings for the season out. We're going to take a look at where MSU stands in all facets of SP Plus and see if that tells us anything about what we can expect from this team going into the 2026 season. Obviously, if you're tuning in, we would love for you to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, have the notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live, and tell all the Bulldog friends, family, people, acquaintances, anyone you know in your life that's a Mississippi State fan, let them know what we're doing here at Mississippi State Live. Tell them to come to the channel, subscribe. Again, Monday, 6 p.m., Thursday, 7 p.m., all-time Central is when you can check us out. And we have other content on the site as well. And look, if you can't catch the show live and you need to catch up on the action, and, again, we'd love to have you on YouTube, but if you'd rather listen on the podcasting platforms, you can find Mississippi State Live on all your favorite audio platforms to go and tune in after the fact. Bulldog baseball goes up to Oxford and gets a 3-game sweep of the Rebels. Obviously, coming into this series, State, it was a top 10 team nationally going up against, and I say top 10, I think one ranking had them down to the number 8. You had some rankings as high as number 4 going into this weekend. But, a near top 5 team going up to Oxford, taking on an Ole Miss team that was still ranked at the time but had been reeling a little bit. Obviously, rivalry series, you're going on the road, but it's a series that State has had a ton of success in. It was 8 of the last 9 had gone in favor of Mississippi State. And all signs pointed towards Mississippi State being able to go and have a big edge facing an Ole Miss team that, again, had not been playing all that well with as well as State was playing. But you can never assume anything, especially in a game like baseball where teams get hot, cold weekend, from week to week. And then, you factor in the rivalry aspect. You're playing on the road. What is this going to look like for you? But ends up going as well as it possibly could have for State. They get the sweep over the Rebels. And really, after the first game, kind of just controlled things. They felt like probably a gut punch win for State and a gut punch for Ole Miss on that Friday night. And really, State was able to carry that momentum into Saturday and Sunday, get the sweep for the 9th series victory in the last decade against Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss has like 10 wins over State within the last 10 years total, I believe is the official count. Brian O'Connor becomes the 7th straight Bulldog head coach to win his first series against the Rebels. And within that span, he is the 3rd to sweep the Rebels in his first appearance, joining Andy Canizaro in 2021 in 2017 and Chris Lemonis in 2019. Interestingly enough, all 3 of those coaches did so on the road. It's kind of funny that the sweeps have come in Oxford. And I believe those are the only sweeps in that time frame. Ole Miss has typically gotten 1 out of the series. But a sweep for State against an Ole Miss team that at the time was in top 10 of the RPI. They're down to number 15 now as it stands. Just a really impressive weekend all around. And, you start Friday night, felt like it was going to be a challenge for State with no Ryan McPherson. And just, what was that going to look like going into that matchup? Ole Miss has Hunter Elliott on the mound. And State starts Charlie Foster, who obviously has struggled to this point of the season, has not had the type of year that you were expecting from him, or that I guess that they were hoping to see from him. But you didn't have a ton of great options for who to throw out there. And, I think the expectation is like, look, we're not going to move Valinkas or Stone off their spots just yet. We'll stick with Foster. And yes, it's a tough matchup against Hunter Elliott, but we do trust our bats to give us a chance every single game. And we also know we're going to have a huge pitching advantage Saturday, Sunday if we keep things the way that they are. Or at least we should have a pretty notable pitching advantage in those games. Let's see what happens Friday night and go from there. And Foster gave good 4+ innings of work. Obviously gives up a solo shot home run, but that's the only thing. Really did what you needed him to. And gave you about as good a start as you could ask for. Now, State's lineup was not producing early in that game, going up against Elliott, who, of course, has had a lot of success against State to this point. But they finally started to get a little bit of momentum there as the game goes along. And, you have the moment there where you give up the home run to Ole Miss, the 3-run shot, and it kind of feels like, all right, this is a tough spot to be in. But obviously with this State team, the lineup being what it is, you can never count them out. And they go in the 9th inning down a run. And you're able to get a couple guys on base, and you're able to bring that run home. And then Sean James pinch hitting gives you a huge triple in a big moment to give you the go-ahead run, and State's able to close it out and get the win. And that was just a gritty – that was a win right there that was like, okay, I think once you got that, you were confident State was winning the series because you knew going into the next 2 days, again, you had the advantage on the mound. You had a big advantage in the lineup. If you're able to go and get that win on the road Friday night when you're throwing Charlie Foster and, State's bullpen throughout the weekend, O'Connor made a lot of quick decisions, guys only going about an inning or so. And I know that there was some concern over that in the moment. The decisions paid off, and you ended up kind of stealing one in a way Friday night, and it really sets you up. And then you go into Saturday, and Tomas Valinkas, 5 innings of shutout baseball. I believe had 9 Ks, 8 or 9 Ks. Was not his sharpest either. That's the thing. He was putting guys on base. He had a few walks. He hit a batter. And a couple times Ole Miss was able to threaten, but he kept getting out of it. Now, the one downfall was his pitch count got up, which is why you were only able to get 5 innings of work out of him. But still, 5 scoreless innings, you'll take that. And then, the bullpen steps up and produces, well, once again, Maddox Miller having a couple big innings for them there. And State's lineup obviously just starts to produce more. And you get 6 runs on Saturday with 7 on Sunday. And then, Sunday, obviously the crazy thing is, the story of the Sunday game is the runners left on base for Ole Miss. They had the bases loaded 4 times, got nothing out of it, which is truly remarkable that would be a thing. But look, I know that's a product of Ole Miss being the team that they are this season, which is that they are overly reliant on the home run ball, and if they need to go and get a big hit to bring runners in, they can't go and do it. State, interesting, was the home run hitting team on the weekend. Kevin Malusi with a couple mashes. Jacob Parker, huge weekend for him. Had an RBI single in the first game, and then had a couple big home runs in games 2 and 3, continuing a fantastic freshman campaign for him. Ace Reese had a home run. Garrett Fry had a home run, also had a double on Sunday. Big weekend for him. He just had a lot of guys. Andrew Raymond with a home run. He had a bunch of guys step up. It was interesting because you saw State offensively. They were the team they've been this year, which is that they do not play small ball because they're not just trying to go and, all right, get on base. We'll try to steal. We'll bunt. We'll try to hit some singles and manufacture runs that way. They're trying to get slug. They're trying to go for extra bases, but they're also just not a home run smashing team where they live and die by the long ball. You saw that, but you also saw that, the lineup has plenty of pop too. They can get the ball out. And Ole Miss didn't get a lot of that this weekend, which you give a credit to State's pitchers. And, going back to the Ole Miss side of things, obviously, leaving all those runners on base is a statistical anomaly, I'm sure, but at the same time, you give credit to State. Like, as much as you can knock Ole Miss for being terrible in those moments at the plate, you also have to give credit to State for getting out of those situations. So this is a big series win, and it's great to get, and it's more momentum going into the year. I mean, kind of just a complete effort from the Bulldogs. And like I said, Ole Miss right now, you look at the RPI, which State is up to number 5, by the way, in the RPI, 24-4 on the season. Ole Miss fell down to number 15, so a pretty significant drop for them compared to where they were coming in the weekend. As it stands right now, that's an incredible sweep on the road resume-wise. Now, if Ole Miss continues to play like the team they've been recently, look, the team you saw in Oxford this weekend, that Ole Miss team is going to struggle the rest of the way. And I've seen all the Ole Miss fans on Twitter. They're basically done with this team. They're kind of writing it off, season over. And if that happens, if they're not a team that ends up – if they continue to trend downward and they don't make a regional, obviously a road sweep in the SEC is always a big deal. But you may look up – especially when it's rivalry – but you may look up at the end of the year and still say, okay, that just wasn't a very good baseball team. I would still bank on – I mean, I'm not going to count Ole Miss off as being just awful just yet. They do have pretty good pitching. Yes, they are incredibly home run reliant, but we've seen State a few years ago be that kind of team. Like, good pitching staff, lineup had plenty of pop, probably more pop than this Ole Miss team. But if they weren't hitting home runs, they couldn't score. That State team still ended up going to the postseason and going and competing in a regional a couple years ago. And I also think Ole Miss has some guys in the lineup, too, who have been around, who have been good players for them that for whatever reason they're just not producing this year. If any of those guys, if it clicks for them, all of a sudden they're a much more dangerous team. I'm not sitting here trying to prop up Ole Miss by any means, but I would say there's still a world where Ole Miss figures some things out, is able to win enough games to find a spot in the regional. I don't think you're talking about them as a host-type team at this point. But we could look up and say, hey, State went on the road and got a series sweep over a regional team, which is always going to be big. So, I mean, you come out of this 7-2, tied for top of the SEC, which you were already tied for the top of the SEC, but now obviously a lot of carnage within the conference this weekend, several sweeps. And it's just State, Georgia, and Texas at the top, and now you get Georgia coming to Starkville this weekend. And the other Bulldogs are – where are they at in the RPI? Are they down randomly low as I scroll? They're 40th in the RPI, which is incredible. That surprises me that Georgia's down that low. And the top 25 rankings, they're like a top 5 team. Like State's – the consensus ranking, State number 4, Georgia number 5. I guess it's a strength of schedule thing. Georgia's 106 in their strength of schedule. Played a really bad non-conference slate. They've got a couple quad 4 losses. They have a quad 3 loss as well. So that's why they're so low in the rankings. But Georgia's still a very good team, a team that hits the crap out of the baseball. Obviously, that's the style of play that they've had for several years now. I say several years. I guess it's just the last couple of years. Which is going to be a test for State's pitching staff as well, obviously. But I think you do trust State's arms enough, and State clearly mashes the ball too. So this should be a really fun battle in Starkville. It's great that State's going to get an opportunity against a highly ranked team at home. I know Southern was ranked fairly high, and they're still top 10 in the RPI as it stands. So like having that as a win at home was good. But we talked about like UCLA and Arkansas, State's biggest opportunities against really good teams. Arkansas did just get swept though. You had to go on the road, and you were close. You were battling in all those games. So it's like, okay, well, what was the difference there? It's nice to get this series in Starkville this weekend to see if State can handle business against a highly ranked team, even if the RPI is not that high in Starkville. And I'm sure it's going to be massive crowds at the Dude all 3 days. I mean, obviously it's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series, so that does change things a little bit. But, huge series. And I feel like, short of State getting swept, which sometimes happens and doesn't really mean anything long term, I don't think anything could happen this weekend that would really change your opinion too negatively of this State team. Even if they were to somehow lose the series at home, you'd still think really highly of them. They've proven at this point they're a really good team, and right now they look like a national contender. But if you get a series win at home against Georgia, you come out of this thing 9-3 in SEC play through 4 SEC series, you're really cooking in a hot spot, and you're challenging for being one of the very top seeds in the country the rest of the way, and certainly putting yourself in position to compete for an SEC regular season title. So huge series upcoming. Great to get the sweep in Oxford. You love to continue owning Ole Miss. I know right now, they're all turning over to football season. And hey, look, I'm very open on this show that I'm a football first guy. Um, we talk mostly football on this show because that's really what this channel and network is, and it's what I know best, and it's my favorite sport. So I won't pretend that I'm above speaking football at all times of the year. But if your immediate reaction after getting swept is, okay, well, what about football? It is baseball season, guys. Like, you can enjoy your football team, you can look forward to your football team, but if you're going to resort to posting highlights of the Egg Bowl after getting your teeth kicked in at home, it's pretty sorry. State, it's still a rivalry, obviously. I do wonder if, and I say that, I know I keep starting and stopping. I'm not of the opinion that competitiveness is what makes a rivalry. I think if there's hatred on both sides, it's still very much a rivalry. I do wonder if, like, do you have the same type guys on your team? Obviously, State's still got plenty of Mississippi natives on that roster, but it's not the same as maybe it once was, where MSU was always building up their roster of dudes who were Mississippi born, raised, grew up wanting to play for Mississippi State, and grew up hating Ole Miss. And it always showed. And I think that's where sort of that standard got built, is you had so many guys on the team that took that rivalry so seriously, like, we don't lose to them. And it's interesting. It started at a time where, Ole Miss baseball had a stretch there where they were having success and were winning the series a little bit more for State right before, Jake Mangum comes in and kind of ushers in that era of dominance for MSU. It's been a decade of dominance on the diamond for State against the Rebels. I do wonder if you have the same type fire on the team, but whether you do or don't, you've got a loaded roster that just went and handled business and is able to keep things going. So you love to continue having that in the series. So great for State right now. Do want to take a moment to tell you guys about, if I can pull it up here. Give me a sec. Okay. Tell you guys about the incredible merch we have here at the Voice of College Football, which you can check, voiceofcollegefootball.shop. We've got hats, T-shirts. This is the one that's got that maroon color. Polos, sweats. You got some drinking gear. And we also have team-specific gear. No Mississippi State just yet. Hopefully we can get to a point where we see Mississippi State as one of the teams up here. Got to continue growing if we're going to get to that point. But, hey, if you know any – obviously all of us know fans of other teams out there, and they need gifts as well. So we got a lot of SEC teams here represented. So definitely go. And if you're looking for a unique gift to find another fan in your life or just something you want to rep yourself, check out the merch that we have at the Voice of College Football. Trying to get my camera fixed. I say it every single week. It's a challenge. There we go. Next up, wanted to talk about the Bulldog linebacker room here as we go into the spring, because we're going to continue our spring positional series. Last week we talked defensive line, getting the defense started off. Talked about that D-line room as a group that I think you can have cautious optimism about, because I think the players that are returning are actually, it's a solid core there. And I think you've got a couple transfers coming in that raise the talent level quite a bit, that this could be a room that makes an impact quite significantly. You look at the linebacker group, and then you're kind of continuing the front seven of the Bulldog defense, or front six, I suppose, and a 3-3-5. And it's obviously a very important group, because you talk about Zach Arnett's defense and the way that they change the presentations and the different fronts that they're going to get in, the ways that they use linebackers as hybrids, notably that Sam linebacker spot between the defensive line and the linebacker room, the blitzes that they like to send, the different pressure looks that they like to send, the way they'll drop guys in and out. That whole unit is very intertwined. Obviously, defensive fronts are always intertwined on every defense. They always are going to be working together. But it's especially true in a defense like this. And it's a linebacker room that I think there's a good reason to have plenty of excitement about. And it was a solid group a season ago. When you look, Nick Mitchell had a really nice season for State. Kind of a guy that fully broke out and ended up, 78 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, had a couple quarterback hurries, had a fumble recovery, had an interception. A big year for him. And we'll always remember, I mean, you do not beat Arizona State if not for Nick Mitchell making that huge stuff on third down late in the fourth quarter of that game against the Sun Devils and holding Arizona State to a field goal. He made a massive, massive play there. And, you do lose a couple guys out of this room, Brandon Jennings and Malik Silla, as those guys rushing off the edge, and sort of that jack linebacker role that, now we call it a Sam linebacker in Zach Arnett's defense, who I was a little disappointed with Brandon Jennings, to be honest, this past season. Didn't feel like you got the highlight. 44 tackles on the year, but didn't have a tackle for loss. Did have 4 quarterback hurries, so he was able to get a little bit of pressure, but Malik Silla was pretty productive for you. He led the team with 7 tackles for loss, had 5 quarterback hurries, 2 sacks. So, didn't turn a lot of those pressures into sacks. But, he was a guy that was able to give you some disruption up front. So, that's a loss. But otherwise, you bring back pretty much this whole room. Jalen Smith gave you 57 tackles last year at your transfer out of Tennessee. 3 quarterback hurries, 1.5 tackles for loss, a pass broken up. Zachary Tillman, a guy we were really, really excited about. And a really solid year. 47 tackles, 3 tackles for loss. He had a sack, a forced fumble, an interception, a couple quarterback hurries. That's a guy that sort of his billing is as a disruptor. And you saw a lot of that last year as a guy that can create some problems up front. Darian Golett was a little bit of a breakout player coming over from Texas with 38 tackles and 1.5 sacks on the season, and sort of factoring into that room. We didn't talk a lot about him throughout last offseason, and then you sort of to hear going into last fall, like, hey, no, this is a guy that's going to play quite a bit, and battled injuries a couple times, but still factored in. And then, of course, you talk about Tyler Lockhart, who was very impressive as a true freshman, and 34 tackles, didn't have a tackle for loss, only 2 quarterback hurries. Really was impressive, though. You go back to that Tennessee game where he sort of gets his first real significant action, and you saw why you're talking about a guy that was one of the top defensive players in the state of Mississippi going into last year, why it was such a big deal for State to get him in the class. Those core 4 guys are all back. And I think having those 4 guys as your inside backers returning in this room is plenty of reason to be excited about this group, because you've got a lot of experience back. Even if you're losing your top tackler, Nick Mitchell, you have a lot of experience back at those inside linebacker positions. So, the Mike and Will spots on this defense, and not to put those expectations on any of these guys, but we saw what Jet Johnson and Buki Watson were able to do playing as the Mike and Will linebackers within a Zach Arnett defense. Those guys are going to rack up tackles. They're going to rack up tackles for loss and pressures. That's how Zach Arnett wants to utilize those guys, is we're going to get them involved. We're going to blitz the crap out of them. And I think it fits what they can do. Specifically, when you talk about Tillman and Lockhart, Tillman is a guy, I've talked about it a lot, going back to the 2024 season. When he makes a play, it's a play that stands out. It's a negative play. He's getting in the backfield. He's batting down a pass. He's getting in the quarterback's face. It's either a sack or, he's making a tackle for loss, fumble force, fumble recovery, interception. The guy makes big negative plays. He's an aggressive player. Zach Arnett's going to use that and use that well. And then I look at Tyler Lockhart and just a guy who's really athletic. And I, flashed a little bit of that where, man, if you want to send him as a pass rusher, you can do that and he can do it well. I think that, again, you have a guy with that type of athleticism at the position, his talent ceiling. I think those 2 guys are going to be in for really, really big years. I'd probably nab them as your 2 starters right now with Tillman and Golett behind them. But you feel really good about that group. Again, you got 4 guys that you can play that you feel confident putting them out there on the field that, hey, they're going to go and handle business. And again, with Zach Arnett leading the way, Matt Brock coaching that position again, you feel really excited about that group. And you don't have a ton of proven experience after that. Obviously, the guy people are going to be really excited to see if he can factor in more Fat Forrest. and the role he could play. Obviously, Tyler Lockhart's high school teammate. Does he get to factor in a little bit more now after being on campus a couple of years, taking his red shirt, and sort of just being a depth piece? What role can he play? Do you see a guy like AJ Rice as a redshirt freshman emerge a little bit? Obviously, this offseason, a chance for those guys to make some waves. And if you go back in time, you'll go back to like the 2022 season. So when Zach Arnett was previously here, State really only played four or five linebackers extensively, right? That's counting Tyrus Wheat at that Sam spot. Johnson and Watson barely left the field, and then Deshaun Page factored in quite a bit. Then J.P. Purvis had a little bit of a role. If you go back to 2021, kind of Aaron, it was Jet Johnson, Nathaniel Watson, Aaron Brule were kind of the guys. And then, Tyrus Wheat as well. You had to go all the way down to number 19 tackler on the team for Sherman Timms as a linebacker who was getting involved. And I think he was doing so as I believe he was one of those pass rush spots. They didn't rotate linebackers quite a bit. So I think if they're going to continue that over, you're mostly looking at those top guys in the room. But I know those younger guys are players that there's been some excitement about how they could factor in and the type of guys they could be. So it will be interesting to see if, again, Fat Force, AJ Rice, if they can play a role here. And if you remember, look, State didn't sign a high school linebacker this year. There was the kid from, I'm blanking on his name, who ends up going to Tennessee. I know they pushed to make that happen because a player of his caliber, and it just would have been a nice recruiting win to get a 4-star player, top 5 player in the state in the class. That TJ White, I believe is his name. But, it didn't happen. He ends up signing with the Falls. You were content, though, with what you had and what you had coming back. Now, transfer portal, they've, brought in a couple of guys. Gab Holman comes in for State. My understanding there is it's kind of the modern-day equivalent of a walk-on. They do have the kid coming in from Syracuse, but that's going to be obviously later on, and that's another guy who's sort of going to just be a depth piece. This group that we've talked about here, those are kind of your inside linebackers. That's who you're looking at leading the way in the room. The edge position is where it becomes a little bit more interesting, that Sam linebacker spot. Because when you talk about players returning on the roster, it's not a lot of obvious answers. Because like I said, if you go back to last year, you lose Brandon Jennings. You lose Malik Silla. I believe Neve Sanders kind of played that role as like the number 3 guy in that room. It may have been did Joseph Head do that a little bit? Yeah, I think Joseph Head may have played that some. All the guys who played that role, even in a slightly different defense, but it's essentially the same role, are gone from a season ago. And then when you look at the guys returning on the roster, there's not been a ton of true obvious, like, oh yeah, that two stepping in to play that position because you just haven't seen it from them yet. I think Tyshawn Willis as a redshirt freshman, remember he was the top defensive player within the state of Mississippi when State signed him 2 years ago now. That's a guy that, I guess was going into last season. That's a guy that, after taking a redshirt year, coming up from a lower level of high school football in Mississippi, how can he factor in? Is he going to be up to speed, be ready to contribute a little bit? That's going to be that's a guy who's supposed to help you as a pass rusher. That was sort of the billing coming out of high school. I think LaKendrick James is someone we've talked about, a 6'2", 250, a guy who, redshirt junior year coming out of, Colin. Could he factor in a little bit more in that spot? And I do think sounds like he's probably playing this role. Based on a guy we'll talk about here in a second, Maury Williams had said in an interview the other day that James was someone that he was kind of working with in the room. So I'm assuming they're playing a similar spot, and it would make sense from a body style standpoint. But those are two guys who just haven't been on the field, haven't done it. The two players you're going to talk about the most, you start with Amari Williams, coming over from Florida State as a transfer. Let me get I know he's listed at 240. What is the 6'4", 240. Began his career at Florida State, splitting time over 2 seasons between the tight end and defensive end spots, and kind of showed flashes at both. And there were sort of questions over where would be the better spot to develop him. And I think clearly the long-term answer is they feel is defensive end, where they think he flashed a little bit more. See if I can pull up his numbers from when he was at FSU last season. So last year for the Noles, as a tight end, he had 2 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown. Defensively, though, 10 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, did have a quarterback hurry. We go back to 2024, caught 2 touchdowns as a true freshman in 8 games played, and really basically just played tight end. So this past year was sort of where they started to factor him in more as a defensive lineman. Felt he could be more of a contributor in that spot. I always go back to a quote Mike Leach had about the tight end spot, because he would always be asked about playing tight end in his offense and why he didn't use them. And he would always say, well, I'd like to have a tight end, but if I'm going to have a tight end, I need a true tight end. And God didn't make too many true tight ends. And the ones he did, a lot of them were playing defensive end. And what he meant by that is the guys that have the combination of size, athleticism, and power that is necessary to play a true tight end, and not just be a guy who's a big slot receiver, not just be a guy who is essentially a fullback, be a true tight end. A lot of those guys get developed as defensive linemen, because that's where it's a little bit more valuable to have those guys for most teams coming up through the high school ranks. And then when you talk about getting to the second level, the premium put on the pass rushers, those guys get developed in that way. You're kind of seeing an example of that here with Amari Williams, a guy that had the athleticism to play as tight end, but also has the size, and you think the traits like, hey, this guy would probably help us out more if we put him on the edge and told him to get after the quarterback. And that's clearly what State is banking on, and Zach Arnett is banking on, that this guy can step in and is going to be a big-time impact player for State off the edge. And we haven't seen it yet from a production standpoint, just a few flashes out there. I definitely would like to go and look more, his time at Florida State to get a little bit of a better idea of what we saw there or what he showed there. But it does speak highly of him. I've talked about it a lot. The Caleb Herring, Harvey Dyson thing, that State did not heavily pursue those transfers. When those guys have more proven production out there, and clearly State and Arnett question whether or not that production is reflective of a guy that's worth being paid starter money for a defensive end in the SEC, or an edge rusher in the SEC, because they think we've got a guy who can give us that in Amari Williams. There's high expectations on him because of that, for sure. That puts high expectations on him. Obviously, if it doesn't work out, then everything we've talked about, sort of the questioning State's approach to the portal this year, it comes out, because it's such an important spot in Arnett's defense. Yes, all the other positions, every linebacker needs to be a guy who's a good blitzer, needs to be a guy who can be good in coverage, needs to be good in run support, all of those things. But the edge position specifically, that's a guy who, we need him to be able to rush one-on-one off the edge. We also want to be able to drop him back into the flat and have him be able to play in coverage. We need to be able to hold up and run support. That's a big thing. So you've got to set the edge, which is something State could not do last year. Teams that wanted to go and just run a bunch of outside zone, pin and pull type schemes against State's defense, they were good at those schemes. They had a ton of success against Mississippi State, because State's edge rushers would just get knocked off the ball and they'd get sealed off. You got to have a guy who can hold up against that. Tyrus Wheat was able to do that. Can Amari Williams be that guy from Mississippi State? That's going to be the big question for him. And then there's the freshman, Micah Nickerson, who was obviously a massive recruiting win for State. When you talk about a guy that was sort of this under-the-radar hidden gem whose recruitment started to take off, he flips to Missouri, and it's like, okay, well, crap, there we go. But we sort of hear, hey, State's not out of this. Like, they're still firmly in the race. They're going to make a push, and they find a way to flip him back just before signing day. I think this was on signing day, and get him signed to be the Bulldogs, and definitely had to do some work. Had to do some work in the NIL market to make it happen. But they get a guy like that on campus who, when it was all said and done, ended up on Rivals as a top 50 player in the class nationally, as a high 4-star prospect. And this is a guy that it's big-time raw athleticism, get after the quarterback. has to refine that. That was sort of the big thing you look on the scouting report. Is this a guy that probably would need a year of development or so, but is a really good athlete off the edge? Played receiver as well. I think receiver and tight end in high school because he's got that athleticism. The big thing that stands out with him is the weight, because he was listed coming out of high school as like 215. He's on the roster at 250 now. And Jeff Lebby did say when he was interviewed in spring practices, he's like, Nickerson up above 250, 255 range. I don't know how you put on that much weight that fast and do so in a way that is, the best for you. And that's not me being suspicious. I don't know clearly I don't know the bodybuilding side of things, but they got his weight up to a point where at 250, yeah, man, you can play that spot. That's a good range to be in. And just from a body physicality standpoint, you should be able to contend against an SEC tackle in the run game. It's not really a concern about being a pass rusher, because I think he's going to have the athleticism, and hopefully he didn't, they kept that while still being able to put on the weight. That's the other big part about it. Does he keep the same bend and the same burst off the edge? But you feel like you can put him out there, and it's not just going to be a case where he gets, knocked away every single play. But even if that's only a guy who can give you reps as a pass rusher, like, hey, third down, third and clear up obvious passing situation, put him in, pin your ears back, go get the quarterback. State hasn't had a guy like that on the roster for multiple seasons. They've not had a guy they could trust to do that. So if Nickerson can play that role, that is a massive benefit for State, for sure. So that's a guy that there's a lot of excitement about. They've got to, Sam, they need at least one guy to truly emerge. It's probably Amari Williams. I'd put Nickerson second right now. And then you talk about Tyshawn Willis, LaKendrick James. Can one of those guys do it? There had been talk about moving, a Darian Gillette or a Ty Lockhart over, but I think they feel good enough about Amari Williams. And I think there's probably some bud with Nickerson putting on the weight. They probably feel pretty good about what they have there, that you don't have to move those guys from the inside linebacker spots and out to the edge. You can keep them inside. If you get somebody to emerge at that spot, this linebacker room is going to be top to bottom really, really good for Mississippi State. I think inside linebacker, I'm really confident. You got a good group there. It's just whether or not you find the outside guy to really emerge. And if you can find that, this could be a fun group. And I think you got a really good coordinator in place who knows how to utilize this position group well. Last thing we'll get into tonight, Bill Connolly for ESPN put out his SP Plus preseason first edition of the SP Plus rankings for the 2026 season. Mississippi State checks in at number 52 nationally with a rating of 3.9. So explaining SP Plus is a measure, it's an efficiency metric, and essentially what it measures is how many points better a team would be than an average college football team. So, however SP Plus measures an average team, Mississippi State is 3.9 points better, according to preseason SP Plus. Offensively, has State ranked number 41 in the country, 30.1. Defensively, number 76 nationally at 28.6. Special teams, 21st with a 0.5 rating. This is all very close to where they were a year ago. State last year was a very similar rated team in SP Plus, and they were in a similar range as well. It's actually a little bit down, and the reason for that would be returning production numbers are not high for Mississippi State. SP Plus factors in returning production as a big chunk of things. It just basically looks at it's not a measure of starters coming back as it is. Connolly has sort of weighed it position by position what matters for offense, and then it is a little bit like a counting stats thing for defense. How much of these numbers do you have coming back? And State is 86th overall in returning productions at 48 at returning production at 48%. They are 99th in offensive returning production at 44%, 69th, nice, in defensive returning production at 52%. Explaining that a little bit, if you were to go, and I can find Connolly's returning production. So the way Connolly does it for weighing things, Percentage of returning offensive line snaps is 39.6% of the overall number. This is for the offense. Percentage of receiving yards from your receivers and tight ends is 35%. Percentage of quarterback passing yards back is 22.3%. Percentage of returning running back yards is 3.1%. It doesn't factor in the run game all that much. State lost a bunch of offensive linemen. State lost a 1,000-yard receiver and its top tight ends. Yes, you bring back the rushing yards, but that doesn't really matter in this factor. You lost a quarterback who threw for most of the yards. So all of that considered, State took a pretty big knock. Now, transferring in production does factor in. He does factor in the production that you added into the room. I think he puts it both into puts it both in the numerator and the denominator of the formula. So a guy like Marquise Johnson, factors in there. All the offensive linemen who've come in, whatever snaps they've played, factors in there. So you got to remember, we've talked about it a lot. The offensive linemen State have brought in, they haven't played a lot. Marquise Johnson is a guy we're really excited about. Production-wise, didn't put up big numbers at Missouri, though, so that's not going to help you out a ton in those metrics. So, yeah, even though we look and we like State's skill talent on offense, we're obviously really excited about Kamario Taylor. That's why that number's low for the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, the way Connolly measures this, it doesn't really go position by position. Its percentage of returning snaps is about 66%, about 19% for percentage of returning tackles, and about 15% returning tackles for loss. Doesn't factor anything for pass deflections or any of that, and I guess that's because it's more that can be impacted a little bit more on the opponents that you're facing, whereas pure tackle numbers, tackle for loss, you can is more reflective on just what you're doing overall as a team. And State is a little bit higher, like I said, they're at 52% returning production on defense. But keep in mind, look, this is still a team, going back to where State was at, their top 3 tacklers from a season ago are gone. Jerron Manning, Nick Mitchell, Brian Lanier. I believe it's 6 of the top 10 as well, with Diego Brumfield, Hunter Washington, Brandon Jennings also moving on. And the safety room, yes, you have Isaac Smith back, but you're losing old guys who played a lot of snaps. Obviously, Nick Mitchell played a lot of snaps. You had some defensive linemen that are moving on that played quite a bit for you. Those edge rush spots, you're losing a ton from that jack linebacker spot, so that means a lot of gone production. Even from a tackles for loss standpoint, of the guys you had 12 players with at least 2 tackles for loss. 7 of them are gone, including your leader in that. Including actually it's 3 of the top 5 and 2 of the top 3 are gone. It's actually 1, 2, 3, 4 of the top 6 as well. I just keep making the point here. So there's a lot of excitement around the defense, but you're losing quite a bit. And that also goes into where, like we talked about, yes, the transfer factor in, but a lot of the transfer State have added, not as much at safety, but like more defensive line in the edge spot, guys where it's potential over production. So from a returning production standpoint, State's not going to rank all that high. And they are in the bottom 5 within the SEC specifically. They are actually tied for the 3rd worst in the SEC in returning production. Vanderbilt's at 44%, Kentucky at 46%, and then State and Alabama both at 48% on their total returning production number. By the way, leading the way in the SEC, South Carolina, Texas, and Georgia all tied at 68% back. Those teams bringing quite a bit back on those rosters. In terms of where State stands overall within the SEC and SP+, they are 15th in the league, 52nd. 52nd overall nationally, 15th within the SEC, ahead of only Kentucky. Bit surprised that Arkansas was still ahead. That one feels odd, and I would like to look more at the Hogs and try to figure that out a little bit more. Arkansas, Kentucky, and State are the only SEC teams that do not have an SP Plus rating of 10 or more. Vanderbilt has a rating of 10 at number 13. I do think Vanderbilt is being helped out a lot by what they did with Diego Pavia, which doesn't really apply now, and they're also losing a ton of production on both sides of the ball. But, nonetheless, overall, when you look at the SEC and SP Plus, Georgia is first at 25.5. That was good for number 4 nationally. Texas was 6th. Texas A&M at 9th. LSU 10th. Bama 11th. Oklahoma 12th. Tennessee 15. Ole Miss 16th. Florida 19th. Missouri 20th. South Carolina 24th. Auburn 26th. And then Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Kentucky rounding out the group. Not a super high projection for State. The metrics early on do not love the Bulldogs, which is, one of those things that you look at and, is it really a surprise? It can't be with everything we've talked about with the State team to this point, because you still have a lot of questions. First, as much as I do think the roster talent has increased, you have a lot of guys who still you need to see the production, and performance-wise in games, it hasn't necessarily stood out just yet. Now, nationally, 52 obviously is not impressive, but it's actually not that terrible either. And I'll try to get this pulled up right here. I got to go over to X. Parker Fleming, who is at Stats of War over on Twitter, had a really cool graph he put up, displaying the discrepancies between a conference that is top heavy versus conference depth, and should be able to display. Let me get this switched over. Make sure that's showing. Yeah, there we go. And what you see is, the Big Ten, and this is kind of a narrative we've heard a little bit about recently. The Big Ten has become the best conference in the country in terms of the teams at the top. Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana really stand out as a top 3 in that conference, ahead of the SEC's top 3, which he has Georgia, Texas, Texas A&M. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not high on the Aggies going into this year. They do have a high returning production number, which surprised me a bit. Which I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. But with what they're losing on the offensive line, I think they're going to take a pretty significant step back. But what you also see is this idea of conference depth, because sort of the narrative is the Big Ten's better at the top, but the SEC is sort of better top to bottom. And this kind of shows it when you look at SP+. After the top 3, the Big Ten takes a pretty significant drop-off, and the rest of the way, the SEC's teams that are ranked in the same spot rate higher. And Mississippi State all the way at number 15 in the SEC still ranks ahead of teams of equivalent spot. I checked it out. State is ahead of 17 other power conference teams in the poll, they're 51 out of 68 power conference teams, including Notre Dame. If you were to do the whole numbers, which I guess Notre Dame is not on this graphic, but they would be. Notre Dame was like 3rd in SP+, so they would actually be up here if this was put out. But you can see, State is clearly not a bottom feeder in college football from a standpoint compared to some of the other power conference teams, like Purdue, Michigan State, Stanford, Boston College, Rutgers, West Virginia, Wisconsin. They've fallen on hard times. Iowa State's probably going to fall off a lot. Colorado, Syracuse, UCF, Cal. These are all teams that are positioned to be significantly worse than where State is at right now. I say significantly, just clearly a tier below than where State is. But you look at where State is within the conference, and you're clearly at the bottom of the league in these projections. Now, they're just projections. That doesn't mean anything about how State's actually going to perform over this season. No, technically not. But you kind of do get a glimpse into where some of the numbers are going to be landing on State going into this year. It's just not a team that's expected to take a big leap forward. And I looked at the final SP Plus rankings from a season ago. State was number 58 at the end of last season. So 6 spots lower than we are this year. But their rating was actually 0.2 of a point higher at 4.1 compared to the preseason projection. I guess how you rate within the nation stands out the most. Now, look, that was also an SP Plus that had Arkansas at number 54 at 2-10 in the country, which I like SP Plus a lot. I'm not dragging it by any means. But, the numbers kind of project State to kind of stick around the same. And if that happens, if they're kind of the same team, then, yeah, you're going to be low in the SEC. And we talked about, State's win total. Got asked about that a couple of weeks ago. State's win total was at 4.5, which you're higher than we were a season ago. Last year, you were at 3.5. You were over by October because you started off 4-0. Fantastic. You're over before October because you get 5 games in the month of September. That's bumped up, but you go through state schedule and you say, okay, ULM and then whichever is it Tennessee State or Tennessee Tech is the FCS game. Okay, that's 2 wins. What are the other gimmies? You kind of say, well, at Minnesota's a toss-up, which, by the way, Minnesota in preseason SP Plus, number 45, with a rating of 5.2. So a little over a point better than Mississippi State on a neutral site. That's the other thing. SP Plus would see this as a close game, probably about a 4-point game, but in favor of Minnesota. And I do wonder, where do they rank in returning production? I think they're bringing back quite a bit. They are number 7 nationally in returning production. Minnesota's a team. I've done some, not a deep dive, but sort of some surface digging on what they have coming back. That's going to be a tough game for State in week 2, going on the road up there. It's a well-coached team that was pretty solid a year ago that's bringing back a lot of good players. So certainly not going to be an easy game for State, but you call it a toss-up. South Carolina on the road, kind of a toss-up. Right now, ratings-wise, the Gamecocks are rated a lot higher, but that's one we kind of have to see it. Missouri comes to Starkville, you can call it a toss-up. Auburn in Starkville, Vanderbilt in Starkville, you would also call those games toss-ups. You got 2 games you should win, 5 that are kind of toss-ups, 5 that right now you're going to be significant underdogs. Look, Alabama, LSU, Texas, I'm pretty high on Oklahoma, even with that game in Starkville and then the Egg Bowl. Those teams are all projected to be a lot better. You're probably losing those 5 games. You'd have to go 5-0 in the toss-ups to be a 7-5 type team. To get to 6-6, obviously you'd have to go 4-1 in those games. But if we're saying a toss-up and give a half a win, that comes out to 4.5. You're on your win total. So you can kind of do the quick math and see how 4.5 is pretty accurate as a win total for State. I don't know where the juice is, positive or negative on there. But, yeah, the expectations are not going to be super high for this team. And they got a lot of questions to answer for sure. Again, I've talked about it a lot. I like a lot of the pieces here. I see the potential. But they're going to have to take a bigger leap forward in some areas. Now, look, one area where they could get better, and I'll point this out. Bill Connolly also put out a few weeks ago, I guess this was just earlier, it was like last week, college football coaches and teams that are likely to improve based on coaching changes. And he had Mississippi State, based on teams that are bringing in a new defensive coordinator, number 2. Last year's defensive SP Plus rating versus the 20-year average, plus 8.4. Essentially what he's suggesting. So the premise is, with a coaching change, you generally would expect a return to the mean for teams. So, okay, the idea would be Dan Mullen versus Joe Moorhead. You lose, Dan Mullen's stretch at Mississippi State was an all-time great stretch, and it was significantly better than what he had taken over. The odds are, when you lose a coach like Dan Mullen, is you're going to see some regression. And Mississippi State saw regression under Joe Moorhead. That's not to excuse Joe Moorhead of his issues as a coach. Just odds are you were taking a step back. Whereas if you were to have a run that was really bad relative to what you typically do as a program, and then you go and you make a coaching change, I guess an example would be Florida State. Florida State, the last couple of years, is far worse than Florida State has typically been. Odds are, if Florida State hires a new head coach, that coach is going to come in and win more than Mike Norvell. We'll see, but that's just an example. State traditionally over the past 20 years has been really good as a defensive program. This is a school that has put together great defenses. They've been bottom tier defensively the last couple of years. Odds are Zach Arnett comes in and defense sort of returns to norm. Is it going to be great year one? We'll see. But they're probably going to take a big step forward on that side of the ball. I would suggest an even bigger step forward than SP Plus is projecting at the moment. Then you factor in, what can Kamario Taylor do for the offense? Well, now all of a sudden you got a combination of an exciting quarterback and a much better defense. Maybe you see a team that really, really jumps up. But, of course, the SP Plus projections can't fully take that into account just yet. So there's just a few things I thought would be interesting to look at where some early projections are for the Bulldogs going into 2026. Does it mean anything for the season? No. And obviously these rankings will still adjust some as we go throughout the offseason. if there's anything notable, we'll certainly hit it, and we'll definitely use it as we start talking about some other teams. But I thought it'd be fun to take a look at where those are, even if the numbers are not that kind to Mississippi State at this point. That'll do it for me tonight. I'll be back Thursday evening with our call-in show. You can also check out my action typically Wednesday nights on SEC Live at the Voice of College at SEC at the Voice of College Football, 7 p.m. Central Time. Don't think I'm going to be on the show this week. I got something else going on Wednesday evening that I'm going to be at, but definitely go check out. Even if I'm not there, Jackson Johnson, Tucker Harlan doing a great job on the channel. So if you're wanting like SEC wide content, definitely go check out SEC at the Voice of College Football. Subscribe over there. And for those of you here, if you're not already subscribed, subscribe. Turn the notifications on. You want to know when we go live. Appreciate everybody who tuned in, and I will see you later in the week. As always, swing your sword. Hail State.
Hey, y'all. This is Grant Sassery of LSU at the Voice of College Football Network. I'm here today to announce that the Voice of College Football Network now has its official website. It's been uploaded so you can look at all the latest news and content from the Voice of College Football Network. You can also look at different forums, channels, shows, and it has to show all the show schedules right here and the host. Make sure to check out the Voice of College Football's new website at vocfb.com. Once again, vocfb.com.